tiniest sewing machine in town, operated by thumb pressure, desk, which folds so he can't silently steal away.
Now that I have my pet rock, I'm happy.
Do you ever remember those wild, weird facts from the 1970s? The ones so real, they almost feel made up now? Back then, everyday life was packed with fads, inventions, and headlines so strange they became part of who we were. But if they were once unforgettable, why did we forget them? You could literally buy a DIY house from the Sears catalog. Shipped in parts and delivered by train, people built real homes this way. In the 1970s, and even earlier, you could flip through a Sears catalog and do something wild. Order an entire house. Not plans, not parts. An actual full-sized kit home, shipped in pieces and ready to assemble. It was called a Sears Modern Home, and it came with everything you needed: lumber, nails, windows, doors, roofing materials, and a thick instruction manual. It would arrive by train, usually in more than 10,000 parts, and if you were handy or had a very patient family, you could build it yourself. These homes were not tiny cabins either. They had porches, fireplaces, multiple bedrooms, and sometimes even indoor plumbing, if you paid extra. They were solid, stylish, and surprisingly customizable. Families across America ordered them to escape the rising costs of traditional home building. The most popular models could be assembled in under 90 days. Many still stand today, especially in the Midwest and Northeast, their origins now more myth than memory. You might have driven past one this week without realizing it. Sears homes were the ultimate do-it-yourself project. Part dream, part sweat, and entirely yours. It sounds like a fantasy now, but back then, building your own house from a mail-order catalog was just another way to start a life. Star Wars action figures were sold in empty boxes. In 1977, Kenner sold early bird kits because they hadn't made the toys yet. In 1977, Star Wars hit theaters and changed everything. The problem? Nobody expected it to explode like it did. Kenner, the toy company, was completely unprepared. Christmas was coming, and they had no action figures, so they did something bold. They sold an empty box. Inside was a cardboard display, some stickers, and a certificate that promised 4 figures by mail. No toys yet, just faith. But kids lined up anyway. They believed in Star Wars, and that was enough. That box became known as the Early Bird Certificate Package. It was marketing genius, and when the figures finally arrived, Luke, Leia, R2-D2, and Chewbacca, it felt like getting treasure in the mail. Parents thought it was a ripoff, kids thought it was magic, and collectors today, they would pay thousands for one of those original boxes, empty or not. Because sometimes, even a cardboard promise can become a legendary toy. The Pet Rock creator became a millionaire in less than 6 months. It cost him less than $1 to make and sold for nearly $4. A rock in a box. That is it. No batteries, no moving parts. Just a smooth gray pebble in a cardboard container with air holes and a tongue-in-cheek instruction manual. It sounds ridiculous, and it was. But in 1975, the Pet Rock took over America. Gary Dahl, the man behind it, sold over 1 million in just a few months. He became a millionaire before most people even figured out it was a joke. The packaging did the heavy lifting. It told you how to train it, care for it, and even how to tell if it was misbehaving. The whole thing was a wink and a laugh during a time when people were tired of seriousness. It was low effort, high reward, and completely harmless. Kids loved them. Adults gave them as gag gifts. And for a little while, everyone kind of wanted one. In a decade full of wild inventions and quirky fads, the Pet Rock reminded everyone not to take life too seriously. Disco records were blown up at a baseball game in a riot called Disco Demolition Night. It turned into a mini rebellion and ended with people storming the field, July 12, 1979, Comiskey Park in Chicago. The White Sox were offering a special deal: bring a disco record and get in for 98 cents. Between games of a doubleheader, the records would be collected, placed on the field, and blown up. What started as a marketing stunt turned into an all-out riot. Fans rushed the field. Fires were set. The second game was canceled. And disco? It never quite recovered. The whole event was called Disco Demolition Night. It became the unofficial moment when disco died, or at least got knocked off the charts. People were angry. Disco had taken over radio stations, clubs, even fashion. This was their loud rejection. Was it about the music? Maybe. But it was also about change, frustration, and the noise of a decade getting louder before it finally gave way to something new. Roller disco. Had its own TV show and professional leagues. Think roller derby meets solid gold. Roller disco was not just skating, it was a whole lifestyle. Neon lights, mirrored balls, funk music, and glitter on every surface. In the 1970s, roller rinks became temples of movement and style, and it all made its way to television. Roller games mixed roller derby, disco dancing, and over-the-top characters. Think tight uniforms, choreographed rivalries, and announcers who treated every spin like a Super Bowl moment. Skaters had stage names, kids had posters of their favorite teams. There were national tournaments, sponsorships, and dramatic storylines played out on skates. It was part athleticism, part theater, all 70s spectacle. And it worked, until it didn't. Like disco itself, the craze eventually burned out. But for one glittering moment, roller skates were the coolest shoes on the planet. NASA had to issue a statement saying Tang wasn't invented by them. The drink was so tied to space missions, people thought astronauts created it. Tang was not born in a spaceship, but it sure felt like it. Kraft Foods invented Tang in the 1950s. It was orange. It was powdered. It looked like science. Then NASA brought it aboard Gemini missions, and suddenly, Tang became the official drink of outer space. Kids drank it to feel like astronauts. The label basically screamed, "From the moon." But the truth? NASA just used it. They did not make it. And when the rumors spread too far, they had to issue a public statement to clear it up. NASA tried to be clear, but the public had already made up their minds. Commercials leaned hard into the space theme anyway. Moms poured Tang like it was rocket fuel. It became a badge of childhood, like sneakers with Velcro or a favorite lunchbox. No one cared who made it, as long as it came in that bright orange tub. Did it stop anyone from buying it? Not at all. Tang was a breakfast table badge of honor, even if it tasted like vitamin dust. You could win a new car just by going to the movies. Some theaters held sweepstakes for AMC Gremlins and Ford Pintos. Movie night in the 1970s had extra magic, and not just from the big screen. Some theaters gave away cars. No, really. You bought a ticket, filled out a form in the lobby, and crossed your fingers. AMC Gremlins, Ford Pintos, maybe even a Chevy Vega. They were not luxury cars, but they were free. And in a world of shag carpet and gas shortages, that meant something. People showed up early, just to enter. Some theaters turned it into a whole event. There were streamers, a guy on a microphone, and maybe, just maybe, someone left the parking lot with a brand new car that night. Theaters knew it filled seats, so the prizes kept coming. Winning a car felt like winning the lottery, even if it backfired once a month. Kids dreamed of driving away in something with seatbelt buzzers and brown vinyl seats. It was not about horsepower, it was about hope. And for a moment, a movie ticket held more than popcorn. It held possibility. People actually sent chain letters by mail and believed bad luck would follow if they didn't. A viral trend before the internet, complete with hand-copied threats. Before email, before copy-paste. There was the handwritten chain letter, a note that promised you luck or doom, depending on whether you followed the instructions. You were told to copy it 5 times, send it to 5 people, and wait. If you broke the chain, bad luck, death, ruined friendships. The letters always said someone tried to cheat fate and suffered. Kids passed them around at school. Grown-ups tucked them into drawers. Nobody wanted to be the one to break it. Looking back, it was harmless. But in the moment, it felt like magic, or a curse, or both. You could recognize the folded paper as soon as it hit your desk. Sometimes it was typed, sometimes in blue pen with nervous doodles. Some letters even claimed they dated back to the 1800s. It was low-tech superstition with a high success rate. No one wanted to be the one. And somewhere, someone still has one stashed in a box, just in case. McDonald's had a hula burger with pineapple instead of meat. It was supposed to appeal to Catholics during Lent. It flopped. Meatless Fridays were a thing. So Ray Kroc had an idea. Replace the patty with grilled pineapple and a slice of cheese. He called it the hula burger, and it was supposed to save Lent. But customers had other plans. They ordered the filet-o-fish instead, created by a franchise owner who knew his audience better. The hula burger flopped hard. It vanished quickly. But for a brief moment in the 1970s, pineapple was supposed to be the future of fast food, and that did not work out. It sounded tropical, inventive, even kind of fun. But people did not want sweet fruit where their meat should be. The first bite confused people, and the second bite never came. Meanwhile, the filet-o-fish became a quiet hit and stuck around. The hula burger became a fast food trivia question and a very weird memory. Mood rings were originally marketed as medical devices, advertised to detect health issues by measuring your emotional state. Mood rings were not just for fun, they were science, or so the ads claimed. Each color was tied to a different feeling, or stress level, or health condition. The idea was simple. The ring's stone reacted to your body temperature. Supposedly, it could reveal how you felt. Blue for calm, black for stressed, green for average. In reality, it mostly just meant your hands were cold. But the illusion worked. Kids wore them like truth detectors. And for a minute, your finger could tell the world how your heart was doing. You stared at the ring, waiting for it to shift, like a mood magician. Some people thought it knew things they did not even know themselves. Others wore it just to look cool in the cafeteria. Even though it was basically a glorified thermometer, it felt like magic. And sometimes, that was enough. A computer dating service existed using punch cards and the U.S. mail. In 1970, you could get a date from a mainframe. Back before apps and swiping, dating involved paper, postage, and a whole lot of hope. In the 1970s, computer dating sounded like science fiction, but it was real and wildly popular. You started by answering a long questionnaire about your hobbies, values, likes, and dislikes. Then those answers were transferred onto punch cards and fed into a mainframe the size of your garage. A week or two later, the results would show up in your mailbox. Not a profile picture, not a bio, just names and a few facts. Sometimes a phone number. You were expected to call or write, a total stranger, and maybe meet for coffee. It was slow, it was awkward, and it worked more often than you'd think. People fell in love this way. Some even got married. Others got a pen pal and a story to tell for life. You trusted a machine to find your soulmate. And in some cases, it actually did. The system was clunky, but it made people feel seen. Each name that arrived felt like a possibility. You were not just filling out a survey, you were filling in the blanks of your future. Today, dating happens in seconds. But in the 1970s, it took patience, postage stamps, and a little faith in the power of technology. There was a cereal called Crazy Cow that turned your milk chocolate or strawberry, and it had a mascot that laughed when milk hit it. Breakfast in the 1970s was loud, sugary, and sometimes strangely magical. Enter Crazy Cow, the cereal that promised a flavor explosion in your bowl. It came in two varieties, chocolate and strawberry, and the gimmick was simple. Pour milk on it, and the milk would instantly change color and flavor. The cereal pieces were corn puffs coated in a dusty layer of mystery powder, which dissolved and tinted the milk like edible dye. Kids were obsessed, not because it was healthy, definitely not, but because it was fun. The mascot was a grinning, wacky cartoon cow that supposedly laughed when the milk hit it. There was no sound, of course, but in your head, you heard that giggle every time. You felt like a scientist mixing a tasty experiment. It was a sugar rush, a cartoon, and a chemistry project rolled into one. Even if it got soggy in 5 minutes, the fun never wore off. You begged for it at the grocery store. You drank the pink or brown milk like it was a treat from Willy Wonka. It turned breakfast into a show, and when the box ran out, it felt like the end of an era. Crazy Cow disappeared in the early 1980s, but those who remember it still smile at the thought of that first splash of milk turning bright and sweet. It was not just cereal. It was a performance in a bowl. You could smoke in the mall, the plane, and the doctor's office, all on the same day. Ashtrays were built into everything, even shopping carts. If you wanted to light up in the 1970s, no one stopped you. Not in the mall, not on a plane, not even in the doctor's waiting room. Smoking was everywhere, and everyone just accepted it. Ashtrays were built into shopping carts at the grocery store. Planes had designated smoking sections, which meant you sat 2 rows away from a guy puffing a Marlboro and hoped the air vent would do its job. Hospitals had smoking lounges. Restaurants asked, "Smoking or non?" But the air always smelled the same. Even cars had ashtrays in every door and a lighter built into the dashboard. Doctors smoked, teachers smoked. Your parents probably did too. It was just part of life, until it wasn't. Over time, the warnings grew louder and the pushback began. But for a while, the whole country ran on coffee, polyester, and cigarettes. You look back now and wonder how we all survived with lungs intact. But back then, it was normal. So normal that people lit up while walking the mall, while getting dental work, even while picking out diapers for their kid. And nobody blinked. Jell-O sold a salad flavor with celery in it, because meat and vegetables in gelatin was peak 70s chic. The 1970s were a weird time for food, especially if it jiggled. Enter celery Jell-O. Yes, that was a real flavor. Not sweet, not fruity, just celery. Green, savory, and slightly salty. It was meant to be the sophisticated base for molded salads filled with shredded carrots, diced ham, olives, or tuna. It was not dessert. It was dinner. And somehow people served it with pride. You would unmold it onto a bed of iceberg lettuce, maybe top it with a dollop of mayonnaise, and call it a salad. Cookbooks were full of recipes for these gelatin monstrosities. Some even called for hot dogs, cottage cheese, or chopped eggs suspended in the translucent wobble. It looked like science class and tasted like confusion. But if you grew up in the 70s, you probably saw one at a potluck or family dinner. And if you were really unlucky, you ate it, maybe more than once. The celery flavor did not last long. It quietly vanished after a few years. But the memory lives on. In vintage ads, in retro recipe books, and in your brain if you were ever brave enough to try it. Gelatin was everywhere back then. Dessert, lunch, dinner, if it could hold still long enough, someone tried to encase it in Jell-O. A game called Barrel of Monkeys was based on a real chemistry tool. The hook design was inspired by molecular modeling equipment. It started with red plastic monkeys and a simple idea. Hook one, then another, and try to make a chain without dropping any. The game looked easy. It was not. You would dump them out, scramble to pick up the first one, and hope your hands were steady enough to keep the chain growing. But what most people do not know is this. Those monkey arms, they were not random. They were modeled after molecular hooks used by chemists to build atom models in labs. A toy maker saw the design and said, "This could be a game." And just like that, Barrel of Monkeys was born. Kids everywhere suddenly cared about balance, strategy, and monkey geometry. It was frustrating and addictive. Just one more monkey, you swore. And then the whole thing collapsed. You started again, determined. Because getting more than 10 monkeys in a chain felt like beating the world. The record? Probably somewhere around 28. But most kids never got close. Still, for a few minutes, you were not just playing, you were mastering monkey physics. Kids could mail away for X-ray specs that promised to see through skin. Spoiler, they didn't work, but the ads were everywhere. If you ever flipped through a comic book in the 1970s, you probably saw it. a tiny black and white ad promising X-ray vision. All you had to do was send in a couple of dollars and wait for the magic glasses to arrive by mail. No batteries, no wires, just cardboard frames and the promise of superpowers. The specs usually came in a paper envelope, and when you slipped them on, the results were disappointing. Instead of seeing bones or someone's underwear, you got blurry shadows and maybe a little double vision. Still, you strutted around like you had government tech on your face. You tested it on your hand 100 times, hoping your bones would suddenly appear. You convinced your friend it worked, until he made you prove it. You squinted at the family dog like you were diagnosing it. And when the headache kicked in, you just said, "That means it's working." Still, it felt like a piece of the impossible had arrived in your mailbox. You wore them around the house. You tried them on your hand, your dog, your little brother. And for 5 minutes, you believed. Even if your head hurt afterward, it was junk. But it was the best kind of junk. Every kid got fooled at least once, and most of us loved every second of it. It was not about the actual X-ray vision. It was about imagination, mystery, and the excitement of believing something might be real, even if it was not. You could order a subscription to cigarettes delivered to your house monthly. Think of it as the original smoke crate. Today, subscription boxes send you snacks, makeup, or themed socks. But in the 1970s, you could subscribe to something very different: cigarettes. That's right. You could have cartons delivered to your door monthly, like clockwork, no ID check, no signature, just a neatly wrapped box of tobacco sent straight to your home. Some companies even included collectible lighters, branded ashtrays, or other loyalty gifts. It was not just a habit, it was a lifestyle. People talked about their cigarette subscriptions the way others talked about record clubs. "You get yours in the blue box or the gold one?" was a real conversation. Some even kept the packaging like it was a collector's item. The delivery guy knew your name and your brand, and maybe even your quit date. It was weirdly personal, like a friendship based entirely on smoke. People were proud of their subscriptions. It was convenience with a cloud of smoke, and nobody thought twice about it. This was before major public health campaigns, before secondhand smoke warnings, and way before cigarettes were taxed into luxury territory. Back then, this was just normal. You got your milk, your magazines, and your Marlboros delivered. The smiley face was copyrighted, and the creator made almost no money. It became a global icon, but he sold the design for $45. You know that bright yellow smiley face, the one with the simple black eyes and curved mouth? You have seen it on shirts, buttons, mugs, and emojis. But it started as a quick sketch by Harvey Ball, a graphic designer from Massachusetts. In 1963, he was hired by an insurance company to create a symbol to boost morale. He spent about 10 minutes on the design. He was paid $45. No royalties, no rights, nothing. The smiley face exploded in popularity almost immediately. Companies printed it on everything they could slap a circle onto. It showed up on cereal boxes, underwear, roller skates, and wall clocks. It became the logo for feelings, even if the guy who drew it never got a second paycheck. Ball just watched the world grin and said, "Well, at least it worked." He never sued, never complained, and even founded World Smile Day later on. It showed up on posters, stickers, even school supplies. Companies began using it to sell everything from jeans to cereal. By the time it went global, the original artist had long been forgotten. And his $45, that was it. Meanwhile, others made millions licensing the image. Ball never complained. He said he was just happy people smiled more, and honestly, that might be the most wholesome ending to a capitalist tragedy ever. There was a real-life Evel Knievel toy that could jump over your furniture, with a working crank motor and everything. Plastic Evel, plastic motorcycle, one tiny crank-powered launcher. That was all you needed to turn your living room into a death-defying stunt show. You wound it up until the gears groaned, let it rip, and watched Evel Knievel fly off a homemade ramp, over shoes, books, pets, or your sister's dollhouse. Sometimes he landed, sometimes he crashed. Either way, it was perfect. You lined up more obstacles. You tried it again. It hit walls. It hit you. It sometimes hit the cat. But no one cared. It was Evel Knievel. You added fire rings made from couch pillows and toilet paper rolls. You acted like every successful landing was a national victory. And when the crank finally broke, you buried him like a hero. This toy was chaos in motion. It was noisy, it broke often, and it could knock over a glass of milk from across the room. But in the 1970s, it was magic. It captured the spirit of Evel himself, loud, fearless, and probably dangerous. In 1976, 7-Eleven released a meat-flavored Slurpee called Manhattan Clam Chowder. It was discontinued almost immediately. No, you did not imagine it. And yes, it really happened. In honor of the American bicentennial, 7-Eleven decided to get festive by turning Manhattan Clam Chowder into a frozen beverage. Ice, tomato, fish. Through a straw. What could go wrong? Apparently, everything. Customers tried it once, then never again. It was described as a seafood smoothie that hated you. Even store clerks refused to recommend it. The machine that dispensed it probably had nightmares. The smell alone cleared a whole aisle. It was discontinued so fast you would think it had committed a crime. The flavor was described as savory seafood slush. It was like drinking cold soup that had made some bad decisions. Even the employees hated it. Unsurprisingly, it vanished from stores quickly. But for a brief, unforgettable moment in 1976, a meat Slurpee was real. And if you remember it, you have earned the right to tell that story forever. The Bionic Woman doll had a flap in her leg that showed her wiring. And yes, you could roll up her skin to see it. In the 1970s, toys were wild, and the Bionic Woman doll was proof. Based on the hit TV show starring Lindsay Wagner, this action figure was not your average Barbie. She was sleek, serious, and secretly high-tech. The biggest draw? Her leg. Specifically, the rubbery flap on her thigh that you could peel back to reveal fake mechanical wiring underneath. It felt strange, like peeling open a secret. You could roll up the skin, examine the plastic tubes, then seal it back up like a spy. It made you feel like you were in on something, like you understood science. You didn't, of course, but the toy made it feel possible. And in the 1970s, that was everything. She had other cool features too, like super hearing that worked through a hole in her head. But nothing topped that little bionic flap. It was weird. It was slightly creepy. And it was amazing. The Bionic Woman was not delicate. She did not have a T-set or a convertible. She had cybernetic limbs, and she meant business. Even today, collectors still talk about that leg flap like it was a technological marvel. And maybe it was, because it made kids feel like they were holding something futuristic, even if it was just plastic and rubber and dreams. You could buy inflatable furniture at Spencer's Gifts, bright plastic chairs you could pop just by sitting down too hard. Before beanbags were king, there was inflatable furniture. Bright, translucent, often neon. These blow-up chairs and ottomans were everywhere, especially at Spencer's Gifts, where you could also pick up blacklight posters, lava lamps, and gag gifts that made your parents uncomfortable. The inflatable furniture trend was pure 1970s. It looked like it belonged in a spaceship, or maybe a dorm room from an alien movie. You opened the box, unfolded the plastic, and started blowing, or used a pump if you were smart. 5 minutes later, you had a chair. And 5 minutes after that, it might already be deflating. Because let's be honest, these things were not built to last, but they were fun. They were cheap, flashy, and lightweight. You could drag them from room to room, arrange them however you liked, and feel like the height of cool. They squeaked when you sat on them. They stuck to your legs if you wore shorts. And they always smelled like a pool toy. But somehow, they were considered stylish. Everyone had at least one friend who owned the full set: chair, footrest, and tiny side table. It was the furniture equivalent of bubble gum, bright, temporary, and too good to pass up. There was a TV game show where contestants threw pies at each other, The magnificent marble machine blended trivia with slapstick. Television in the 1970s was not afraid to be weird. And the magnificent marble machine was proof. It was a game show. It was a pinball machine. And it was pure chaos. Contestants answered trivia questions, but instead of a boring scoreboard, they got a giant pinball game, 20 feet tall, with flashing lights and giant paddles. That was not the only twist. The show also included bonus rounds where people threw pies, real pies, at each other, and not in some neat, polite way. These were full-on whipped cream missiles, launched in a flurry of sugar and screaming. It was like Jeopardy met a food fight, and America loved it, at least for a little while. The show only lasted a year, but the memory stuck. It was loud, messy, and absolutely unforgettable. Some critics hated it. Others called it brilliant. But one thing was clear. It was the only game show in history where answering a question wrong might result in a pie to the face. In the 70s, that counted as entertainment gold. People used to put AstroTurf in their cars for decoration. Nothing says style like fake grass on your dashboard. Nothing about the 1970s was subtle. So naturally, some people thought putting fake grass inside their cars was a good idea. And not just on the floor, on the dashboard, the rear deck, and even the ceiling if they were bold enough. AstroTurf became a mini decorating trend, especially among younger drivers or anyone who wanted their vehicle to feel fun. It was cheap, it was green, and it was weirdly charming. You could glue it down, cut it to size, and suddenly your Chevy felt like a backyard barbecue. Some people added plastic flowers or little garden gnomes for extra flair. Others paired it with fuzzy dice or a bobblehead dog. It was not about realism, it was about vibes. These were the same cars that had incense burners hanging from the rearview mirror and 8 tracks blaring disco. AstroTurf was part of the mood. It felt soft to the touch and a little ridiculous, which was exactly the point. It was playful. It made no sense. But in the 1970s, it somehow worked. It turned your car into a conversation piece. And honestly, who doesn't want to roll up to a party in a station wagon that smells like vinyl and looks like a putting green? There was a time when every fast food place had a mascot that was deeply creepy. From Burger Chef to Mayor McCheese, some were downright nightmare fuel. If you were a kid in the 1970s, fast food was not just about burgers, it was about characters. And some of those characters were deeply, deeply unsettling. McDonald's had Ronald Shore, but it also had Mayor McCheese, a giant-headed politician with a cheeseburger for a face. Then there was the Hamburglar, Grimace, the Fry Guys. They lived in a place called McDonaldland, which was somehow both magical and mildly terrifying. But it did not stop with McDonald's. Burger Chef had his own weird crew, including Jeff and a floating Burgerini. Hardee's had Gilbert Giddyup, who looked like he escaped from a bad puppet show. Even Jack in the Box had a clown head popping out of a speaker until someone bombed it in protest. That is not a joke. It really happened. These mascots were meant to charm kids, and maybe they did. But they also haunted dreams. Giant foam heads, fixed stares, smiles that never changed. If you loved them, great. If they scared you, you were not alone. The 70s fast food mascots walked a fine line between adorable and alarming, and that was just part of the magic. Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends, you collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did, and then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. Toilet paper was one-ply, thin as tracing paper and rougher than a cat's tongue. You didn't squeeze the Charmin because there was no Charmin. What you got was the store brand in a plastic-wrapped 12-pack that looked soft but felt like it had been sanded. You used twice as much to do half the job, carefully folded for maximum efficiency and minimal risk. If it tore mid-use, you didn't scream, you just sighed. Sometimes it was gray, sometimes off-white, and every so often you found a rogue wood chip in the sheet like nature's cruel joke. Fancy two-ply was for rich folks, or the neighbors you envied every time you went over and noticed the plush roll on their wall. And heaven help you if you were sick and had to blow your nose. That stuff could start a brush fire if you rubbed too hard. Still, you made do. Nobody thought it was weird. Nobody knew better. It was just part of the budget, and a very itchy part at that. But at least in the bathroom, you weren't trying to preserve something that was literally made to be ripped apart, like wrapping paper. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did, kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. If your grandmother had a nutmeg grater drawer, you already know this was not about convenience. It was about pride. Tucked away like a secret compartment, this tiny wooden drawer usually had a built-in metal grater inside, fixed to the bottom or back wall. You would slide it open, pop in a whole nutmeg, and grate just enough to finish your pumpkin pie or rice pudding. It was oddly luxurious for such a tiny task. People swore that freshly grated nutmeg was leagues above the powdered kind from the store. And in kitchens that ran on rituals, this mattered. Nutmeg had a smell that meant something. Holidays, Sundays, a warm drink on a cold evening. It was the finishing touch, the kind of detail that showed you cared about flavor, not just filling bellies. One twist of that drawer and the kitchen felt instantly more personal. But as time went on, spice blends got pre-mixed, and the grater drawer seemed too specific for modern use. Most disappeared when newer cabinets came in. The metal rusted, the drawer warped, and eventually it was either nailed shut or tossed out with the old silverware. But once, it was a mark of a thoughtful kitchen, one where flavors came from effort, not a jar. Next time you taste store-bought eggnog, ask yourself, what tiny traditions did we leave behind? Going to the movies in the 1980s was not just an outing, it was an initiation. You did not just watch Back to the Future, you traveled in time. You did not just see E.T., you believed in aliens, friendship, and flying bikes. The Goonies made treasure hunts seem plausible in your own backyard. Ghostbusters had you checking every closet for slime. These were not just movies, they were portals, promises, and rites of passage. Every frame was burned into memory, every line quoted in playgrounds and lunchrooms. Blockbusters were not about selling tickets, they were about shaping imaginations. They gave us John Williams scores that made hearts race and Spielberg visions that made magic feel real. Crowds lined up outside theaters, popcorn in hand, hearts pounding. Parents, kids, teens, they all came together in the darkness of a movie theater to be transformed. These films were louder, brighter, funnier, and somehow deeper than anything that came before. And when the credits rolled, you did not leave the theater the same person who walked in. You left dreaming, you left changed. The movies of the 1980s did not just entertain a generation, they raised one. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. A coffee can full of bacon grease was the unofficial flavor station of every poor kid's kitchen. You'd see it sitting proudly next to the stove. No lid, no label, just a dented old can full of meat drippings and ambition. Every time bacon hit the skillet, Mom would pour off the fat and stash it for later. Why waste a perfectly good ingredient when it could fry tomorrow's eggs, crisp up potatoes, or even flavor the pancakes? That can held the essence of 100 breakfasts. It was thick at the bottom, layered with sediment like geological bacon history. Sometimes it congealed into a creamy mess. Sometimes it smoked like a chimney when reused for the third time that week. But it worked. It added taste, it added calories, and it saved buying oil. It was both seasoning and survival. And if the grease had a few bacon bits floating around, even better. You dipped bread in it. You reused it until it practically developed a personality. Bacon grease didn't just cook, it connected generations. But if bacon grease was gold, the cereal situation was less shiny. Wearing patches on clothes was less about style and more about grit. Holes in the knees, sewn shut with denim cut from old jeans, elbows wearing thin, covered in colorful scraps stitched with uneven lines and quiet determination. Every patch was a story, a game of tag gone too far, a tumble off a bike, a season of growth that stretched fabric past its limit. You did not throw things out, you fixed them. Because replacing a pair of pants was not always an option. Your mom had a sewing kit in an old cookie tin, filled with thread that never matched and buttons that had seen better days. She worked at the kitchen table, bent over your clothes like a surgeon, making something broken last just a little longer. You might have felt embarrassed. You might have tugged your sleeves to hide the stitching. But those patches were love in disguise. They meant someone cared enough to keep you dressed, even if the clothes were tired. They meant you kept going. Sometimes those patches were loud. Bright fabric that clashed with the shirt, a cartoon print stitched onto plain denim, whatever scrap was closest to the sewing basket. And sometimes they were nearly invisible, matched carefully to hide what had torn. Either way, you knew where they were. You could trace each one with your fingers. They scratched a little when new. They softened over time. On cold mornings, you sat still while your mom pinned a square over a frayed spot, asking you to hold your arms up or turn around so she could get it right. It was uncomfortable, but it meant you were cared for. No one wasted thread on clothes they did not plan to keep, and no one stayed up late mending knees if they did not believe you were worth the effort. Some patches covered wear and tear, others covered stains you could never quite get out. But all of them did the same thing. They gave your clothes a second life, and in the process, they gave you a quiet kind of dignity. You might not have had new clothes, but you had something better. Clothes that were saved, like you, again and again. And in a world where appearances mattered too much, patches were the proof that making do was still doing enough. You were worn, but you were whole. Before open concept became the norm, the kitchen pass-through window was the perfect compromise. It was a small rectangular opening in the wall, usually with a sliding panel or shutters, that connected the kitchen to the dining room. You could serve dishes straight through, peek out to check on guests, or whisper a message without leaving your post at the stove. It was functional and a little bit fun, like a drive-through for your own home. Kids loved it because it felt like a secret door. Adults loved it because it saved steps. These pass-throughs became iconic in mid-century ranch homes and suburban houses. But as walls came down and kitchens turned into wide-open living spaces, the humble pass-through lost its purpose. Some were plastered over during remodels. Others became awkward holes in drywall with no clear use. But once, they made kitchens feel like command centers, like you could be in 2 rooms at once. What did we gain when we knocked down those walls? And what subtle joys did we lose? No one was ready. Not the music industry, not the public, not even the moon, which he would soon walk across. In 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller, a title that would come to define the very heartbeat of pop culture. This was not just an album, it was a tidal wave. Every track felt like it could carry its own legacy, but it was the music video, the short film really, that sent shockwaves through every living room in America. Red leather jackets, ghoulish dance moves, Vincent Price's eerie monologue echoing into a generation's dreams. It was scary. It was sexy. It was genius. Thriller redefined what a pop star could be. Michael was no longer just a singer. He was a world builder, a visual storyteller, a phenomenon. He shattered racial barriers on MTV, igniting a cultural shift that went beyond music. Parents, kids, teens, grandmothers, everyone danced, everyone watched. Thriller became a global obsession, and suddenly Halloween had a new anthem: the glove, the lean, the laugh. It was not just entertainment, it was an event. To be alive in the 80s was to live in the shadow of Thriller. And to this day, nothing has ever moved quite like it. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. A metal television antenna with pliers as the remote was peak 70s innovation, because when the knob broke, and it always broke, no one ran to the store. You just grabbed whatever tool was nearby and made it work. Those bulky televisions were furniture, literal wood-paneled tanks. Changing the channel involved standing up, twisting a dial that clicked through 3 fuzzy stations, and praying the vertical hold didn't freak out. When the knob snapped off, you didn't replace it. You jammed in a pair of pliers, vice grips, or even a fork. Sometimes it was taped up with masking tape or rubber bands for extra grip, like some post-apocalyptic control lever. Getting the channel just right took surgeon-level precision and patience. You'd lean in, turn slowly, hear that satisfying clunk-clunk, and hope it landed on the right UHF miracle. If someone walked too close to the antenna, the screen would go berserk, so you'd angle it just right and bark, "No one move!" until The Price is Right came in clear enough to see Bob Barker's microphone. Some households had elaborate antenna balancing rituals. One leg up, arm outstretched, holding a metal spoon while standing near the window. Others just wrapped the whole thing in aluminum foil and hoped for the best. Television time wasn't about ease. It was about negotiation, shared suffering, and creative problem solving. And speaking of creative, dinner time had its own government-issued solution. Limited access to cable television in the 1980s meant your world came through rabbit ears. You had the basics, network channels, maybe a grainy local station or two. But when friends talked about Nickelodeon, MTV, or the Disney Channel, you just smiled and nodded, pretending you knew what they meant. Your TV had an antenna wrapped in aluminum foil. Your Saturday mornings were for cartoons on the few channels that came in clear. You learned to adjust the rabbit ears just right, then sit perfectly still, because moving even an inch might send the screen back into static. You missed out on the cable exclusive shows, the big movie nights, the flashy channels with round-the-clock music videos. You got public access, reruns, and news that ended with the national anthem. At school, you heard about shows you never saw. You laughed along anyway. At home, you made the most of what you had. Limited channels meant fewer choices, but also fewer arguments. You watched whatever was on. You made it work. And you learned something strange. When there was only one option, it often became your favorite. The picture was not perfect, but it was yours. And sometimes, that was enough. The electric hot plate built into the countertop was not meant to replace the stove. It was there for the in-between moments, the simmering, the reheating, the lonely cup of soup on a gray afternoon. It looked like a single stovetop coil embedded right into the counter, usually near the sink or beside the coffee station. You turned the knob and it glowed red. No pots stacked on burners, no full stove required. For single servings or quick boils, it was perfect. They became especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s during the height of the modern kitchen boom. They were sleek, functional, and felt futuristic. But they came with risks. Open coils got hot fast, stayed hot longer, and were sometimes forgotten. Over time, homeowners chose to have more counter space instead. The coils vanished, replaced with cutting boards and clean surfaces. But those hot plates once stood for independence, the idea that a small meal still mattered, that a house could be big, but one burner could still feel like home. What part of the kitchen did we lose when we made everything smooth? The future did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in a beige plastic box that hummed quietly on a desk in the corner of your house. The Commodore 64, the Apple Macintosh. These were not just machines, they were portals into something entirely new. You typed, and the screen listened. You clicked, and doors opened. At first, it was simple. Word processors, floppy disks, a little green cursor blinking like it had a secret. But quickly, it became more. Games, learning, possibility. For kids, it was a playground. For parents, a tool. For dreamers, a revolution. It changed homework. It changed jobs. It changed you. That blinking cursor? It whispered that anything was possible. Families gathered around, just trying to figure it out together. The sound of a printer was like the future on paper. And the internet? Still a myth. Still a whisper. But you felt it coming. With every boot-up chime, every pixelated game, every painstaking keystroke, you were stepping into a new world. Personal computers did not just change technology. They changed lives. And for the first time ever, the future was not in a sci-fi movie. It was sitting on your desk. VHS rental adventures were more than just picking a movie. They were the night's main event. You walked into the store greeted by rows of clamshell cases, each one shouting for your attention with over-the-top artwork and dramatic taglines. New releases lined the front wall, but they were often already rented, marked by empty plastic holders and your own growing disappointment. So you wandered. Comedy? Horror? Something animated for your little brother? You judged movies by their cover. You flipped tapes to read the backs, squinted at blurry screenshots, and made last-minute switches at checkout. there was pressure. Choose wisely. You had this movie for 2 nights, maybe 3. Forget to rewind? Expect a fee. Some stores even had a "Be Kind Rewind" sign that became a national motto. You got home, made popcorn, and watched together as a family. The sound of the tape sliding into the VCR meant it was officially movie night. VHS rentals turned average evenings into little adventures. They made choosing a movie feel like a quest. And even though we stream everything now, nothing beats the charm of browsing those old shelves and hoping your top pick had not been snatched first. Holes in your shoes didn't mean new shoes. They meant cardboard. You'd pull apart a cereal box, cut out the shape of your sole, and slide it into your sneaker like some kind of soggy orthopedic miracle. Sometimes it was a Pop-Tarts box. Sometimes Raisin Bran. It was soft at first, warm even. But the second you stepped into a puddle, game over. That cardboard turned into oatmeal and your socks paid the price. Still, you didn't complain. You just dried them by the radiator and kept going. You'd tape it, replace it, and keep wearing those shoes until they practically walked off your feet on their own. The soles flapped like flip-flops. The toes curled up like elf shoes. New shoes were for Christmas or growing a full size, not for silly little things like comfort. You learned to walk light. You avoided rain. You stopped running in gym class because you didn't want to leave half your shoe behind. And still, you kept wearing them. Because that's what you had. That cardboard bought you time and pride. Meanwhile, over at the window, your curtains weren't exactly Martha Stewart approved. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. A countertop garbage chute might sound like science fiction, but it was once the definition of practical design. Picture this: a hinged square in the middle of your kitchen counter that popped open to reveal a direct drop into the trash bin below. You could chop carrots, peel potatoes, and then sweep the scraps in one motion. No fiddling with a trash can lid, no extra step. Just a quick flick of the wrist, and it was gone. In mid-century kitchens, these were genius, especially when you were making big meals and needed all the counter space you could get. It made cleanup feel like part of the flow, not an afterthought. One swift motion and the mess was gone before it had time to become a problem. But eventually, people began to worry about smells, pests, and hygiene. Builders stopped including the feature, and home cooks grew wary of having an open hole in the counter, even if it had a lid. Most of them were sealed shut or removed entirely during remodels. Today, you will only find them in untouched kitchens from the 1940s or 1950s. They are almost always covered in laminate or chrome trim, like a forgotten piece of spaceship tech. What other clever shortcuts have we erased without even realizing it? Hip-hop was born in the Bronx, but in the 80s, it exploded into every corner of American life. It was not just a sound, it was a movement. And when Run DMC hit the stage in Adidas tracksuits and shell-toe sneakers, you knew the world was about to change. This was more than music. It was poetry over beats, rhythm over silence, truth over noise. The 80s marked hip-hop's rise from underground parties to global power. LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Grandmaster Flash. These were not just rappers. They were messengers. Each lyric felt like a coded message from the streets, a heartbeat from the city itself. Hip-hop spoke about struggle, pride, injustice, and survival in a way that made you stop, listen, and feel. And the style? Just as fierce. Gold chains, Kangol hats, boomboxes on shoulders. This was fashion with purpose. The look was bold, but the voice behind it was louder. Breakdancing hit sidewalks like fire. Graffiti tagged the city with identity. And everywhere you turned, the bass dropped like a gavel. Hip-hop turned sneakers into icons and turned raw truth into chart toppers. It did not ask for a seat at the table. It built its own table, right there on the pavement. And anyone who came of age in the 80s knew they were witnessing the rise of a new American language, one that still speaks volumes. If this blast from the polyester past made you smile, drop your weirdest 70s memory in the comments, give that like button a disco spin, and subscribe so you never miss a trip back in time.